Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode in the Multiverse video series. Today we're going to learn how to use the pins package with Github Actions. This can allow you to create simple data pipelines that you can easily share with others or keep updated with ease. I'm not going to make a recap of what exactly the pins package is, but as usual, you are welcome to take a look at some of our previous videos and recap what exactly that is. So as an example today, what I wanted to try to do was to try to transform some of the COVID-19 reports from the World Health Organization into a format that is already easily consumable. Now there's other repos out there that where people have already achieved this by cleaning their datasets, and I'm going to point you to those repos as well. But I wanted to try out to basically use this as an excuse to try out to create a simple data pipeline with pins. So here's the problem that we have at hand. Suppose for a second that we have a bunch of PDF reports which don't happen to be nicely structured, right? So in this case, the PDFs are mostly they're just PDFs and there's tables inside. So what we really would want to do is to have a data set that represents these tables that is on a format that is easily consumable from R. And as you can see also, like, the reports are being created daily. And so ideally, we want to have an automated process that simply transforms these PDFs into data set and that others can consume or that you can use yourself in applications. So how do we go about this? Well, so actually before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions happens to be a feature from GitHub, which allows you to run basically a script on demand based on different conditions. So one of the conditions can be whenever you push data to your repo, but they also support auto-scheduling your scripts for them to be easily automated. So kind of like this is the concept. You can build, test, and publish, and whenever that happens, you execute a particular action. Yeah, so I'm not going to get into too many details, but what I do want to point out is that there is a great repo under the rlive organization, which has a lot of examples and also some of the scripts that you would want to use. For instance, there is a setup R action that you probably want to consider. And what this GitHub action does is it basically sets up the R environment for you such that you can use R within your GitHub action. So this one is really, really useful. And as you can see, it's very simple to create. All right, so how do you go about kind of like tackling this problem of converting PDFs to data sets on a schedule? Well, the first hint is that we're going to use GitHub Actions. And the second one is that we're going to use pins. But honestly, using pins here is the easy part. There's just a couple caveats. So let's get started with the GitHub action. So in order to create a GitHub action, what I like usually doing is just creating a .github/workflows directory. And then inside here, what you want to create is a YAML file. So this particular YAML file, I have already pre-created it. And what this YAML file does is it basically checks out this particular repo. So to make sure that you have like all the data from the repo pretty much. And then also what it does, well, in this case, I'm using rjava, so I need to configure it. And the other interesting piece is that we're also using the GitHub action that we just mentioned to make sure that our script can execute our code. So actually with these two, you're almost up and running. Now in this particular case, I also need to install a few system dependencies, and I'm also installing some packages. Now if you're serious about embracing GitHub Actions, you should probably consider using renv and then cache your packages. But for this particular video, I just wanted to do something quick and dirty that gets us up and running without worrying too much about execution times and configuring caches. All right, so that's all we're doing. We're configuring R, and then we're installing some packages. And then the last step is you basically want to run your R code. So in this case, I'm running a file that I'm calling ci/build. If you're building a package, you could also at this step build your package and then actually execute functions from your package, which would be desirable. So again, this is just a quick introduction. I still found it quite easy to follow and use, and useful above everything. All right, so we have a GitHub action ready, and you can also configure it to configure this GitHub action to run whenever you push to master, or you can also schedule it to run on a schedule, which in this case I configure it to be running every hour. And once you do that, and once you push the code up, what you will get is basically your GitHub actions that execute whenever you schedule them to run. So in this particular case, I have a build, and you should see something like this, which is just a set of steps that we define on the YAML file. And eventually, in this particular case, what we want to do is build our dataset, right? But again, all we've done up to this point is just set up GitHub Actions to run a custom script on demand. Now, what do you do on your on your particular script? Well, that's really up to you. So what I did here in particular is I defined two functions. The first function I'm calling kind of like it's an index function, and all it does is it returns the PDF files from this particular World Health Organization website. That's all it does, and you can basically do whatever you want. You can apply these to different problems, and then the next step, what I'm defining is kind of like a simple function that what it does is it extracts the table within a PDF file. Now, for this, I'm using the Tabulizer package, which happens to use the RJava package. Now, RJava is like any other R package, with the exception that most of the time you need to configure Java in advance, and it can be at times quite tricky. So what I recommend doing is just simply running this particular script in your YAML file, which we just took a look at, which is might be easier to take a look on the YAML file, which you can also edit on RStudio. But all you have to do is run rcmd java reconf. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And once you have the RJava package installed, you can also install Tabulizer, which will extract, for instance, in this particular case, we can call this index, and we can say index1. And basically what we would do is we would just parse this with Tabulizer, with parse. And all it does is it generates a table based on the PDF format. All right, that's the first two steps that we need to do as helper functions. Now, once we're done with those helper functions, what we are doing in this particular case is actually processing all the files. And again, you can do this, a little bit more clearer with things like per or why not. In this case, I'm just doing a for loop. And here are the couple interesting things. So first of all, since we're going to export these data sets as pins, what we want to do is register the board. So we're registering GitHub as a board where we're gonna output our data sets. Now, you don't need to you don't necessarily need to use GitHub. You could be using an S3 bucket or Kaggle or RStudio Connect or whatever. In this particular case, I'm using GitHub because I already have everything on GitHub. I have my code, my GitHub action, so it makes sense also to put the output data sets directly in GitHub. But again, you can use a different board with GitHub Actions if you choose to. So you register your board. That would be the first step, one of the first steps you want to do. And then in this case, what we're doing is we're being a little bit smart, and instead of processing all the PDFs all the time, we have a cache of the PDFs that we have already processed, and this also gets stored as a pin on the GitHub on GitHub, just to make sure that we don't reprocess the PDF over and over again. So it's just a little optimization. And then this is the bulk of the work. I'm not going to explain it because all it's doing is basically calling those two helper functions. And once we actually have the data sets, what we end up doing is looping through each table and then pinning the resulting data set back to GitHub. And then at the end, we update our table of the processed PDF files. That's honestly pretty much it. But I do want to mention a couple caveats. So the first one that is going to save you a bunch of pain, I think, you want to make sure when you're following this type of workflow where you're pushing, you're using GitHub Actions and you're pushing datasets to GitHub, one of the things you want to do is you want to scope the GitHub action to only run when you push changes to master. So actually, while I was preparing this example, I forgot to add this particular step. And what ended up happening is that if you publish with a dataset to GitHub, then you can get into a recursive loop where you're pushing a dataset from a GitHub action into the same GitHub repo, which in turn causes a GitHub action to start, and again to publish another GitHub dataset from the pins package, which in turn updates the repo and reruns again. So if that happens, well, it's easier if you don't let that happen. That's so much easier. If that happens in that case, what I did in order to stop at least temporarily was just to edit this file and delete the whole entry. Anyway, so make sure that if you end up pushing datasets to GitHub, just make sure that you are not building or running GitHub Actions on those branches. So that's one caveat. The other caveat is in order to upload a GitHub action, in order to upload a dataset from a GitHub action into GitHub, you're gonna need a GitHub personal access token. So you can configure that with your secrets, and it's actually quite easy. All you have to do is open your settings, and if you go to secrets, you can add your particular secret here. So you can click add new secret, add the secret, and get your personal access token from your account settings on developer. And once you have that, basically you can use that securely. You can specify in your action that you're gonna set the GitHub personal access token to that particular access token that we define. And then when you run your script with R, and the pins package will just basically take the access token from there, and it will allow you to publish it. So again, it's pretty straightforward, but there's those two caveats. But now taking a look at the fun stuff about this is that like now we can actually see this running. So if we go to actions, as we mentioned, this has been kind of like running continuously, which is quite nice. And then what we can do is also basically also kind of like take a look at how our pins looks like. So the first thing that we want to do is include the pins package, and then we want to connect. We don't even need to connect as GitHub. We can connect to this board using the data.txt extension, mostly because it's read-only and it's a public repo. And then as you can see here, we have all our data sets that we've been parsing from the World Health Organization dump of PDF files. And each of them have the different kind of like data sets that you would expect. Now, I kind of honestly run out of time for this particular video. So one of the challenges in this particular task is that even though we're converting the data sets to tables, they have not been cleaned up. So as you can see here, for instance, for this particular data set, you can see that the tabulizer package does not parse nicely all the headers. So in this case, for instance, there are still a few things that don't make sense. You can look, for instance, at a few others, and you're gonna see here that you would have to split these columns into deaths, cases, and confirmed deaths, cases, and actual deaths. So there's still a lot of cleanup to do on this particular process that I did not have time to clean up, but it's definitely something, especially if you have a simpler problem at hand. It's something that you can spend time and kind of like also automate that part. Right, so how does that look like? Well, we can register our board. Then we can look at those particular data sets that we're automatically processing every hour. And then you can also retrieve one, and you could potentially do data analysis, and why not? And yeah, that's pretty much it. There's obviously a lot of work here still to clean up the data properly. As you can see, like all these are characters where there should be integers, and why not? But that's beyond the scope of this book. Pardon me, this is beyond the scope of this video. What I wanted to showcase here is that you can use GitHub Actions with pins to kind of like build these simple data pipelines that clean code or like enhance some particular data set that you might be interested in. Now, if you actually want to do some analysis, you might want to consider using a few other repos, like this repo that you can find also attached to the description, which actually provides a clean CSV already ready to consume. I'm not sure how they build this particular data set. My guess is that it might have been created by hand, which is a really good option because there's not that much data, and also you want to make sure that the data is correct. So maybe a combination of manual and automatic is a good way of doing it. So definitely, if you want to actually find like a data set that is already cleaned, you could use that particular GitHub repo, and then you can still use pins to download that particular data set and take a look at that. So again, this data set is already cleaned up, which is really nice. We could potentially get it to the point where it gets automated from the PDF all the way to a tidy data set. I think for this particular set of PDFs and data sets might be tricky because they're changing daily. So it could be quite tricky to keep them up to date, but it's definitely possible. And then you can also do some analysis, and why not? All right, so I hope this gave you like a good idea on how you can use GitHub Actions with pins to create these pipelined type of data sets. And I should have mentioned that one more caveat actually before we finish the video. I should have mentioned that let me go back here. One thing that I would recommend as well is when you're pinning your data sets, as we can see here, when you register your data set, I recommend using a branch rather than the main repo. The reason is that pins is very verbose on the number of commits that it creates. So if you create all those in a branch, as you can see, there are already 1,500 commits just from me continuously developing these on the past few hours. So it can be quite verbose on the number of commits that get pushed up. So usually working on a branch is nice. So you can have your code in the main branch, and then the actual data sets on a sub branch. And still, you have access to all those particular data sets, but they don't need to be exactly available on the main branch. I mean, that's something that I prefer, but it's definitely up to you. You can customize that as you see fit. All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this video.